West, water was like gold, and it became the center of many debates. Conflicts between farmers and ranchers, as well as delegates concerned about fair water allocation, occurred due to the lack of water. In 1888, Elwood Meade was hired as the Wyoming territorial engineer to find diplomatic solutions to solve water right issues in the West. Meade's ideas replaced Old English common law principles of riparian rights and have paved the way in finding compromises between Wyoming and Nebraska. These laws continue to highlight the successes in water issues throughout the arid West.
Wyoming's original water rights were the cause of many debates. Wyoming had adopted the laws from California and Colorado and used the Old English common law principles of riparian rights. These ways were very ineffective in the arid climate, leading farmers and ranchers to argue over the amount of water they needed. Also in California and Colorado, people could claim water freely, which often led to people using more water than their fair share. Under riparian rights, you could only use a water source if it was adjacent to your property. Elwood Meade's laws better allocated water usage for all water users.
Irrigation was vital to Wyoming's agriculture, both farming and ranching. Elwood Meade, chief engineer of the irrigation in the Department of Agriculture, stated, "In about 2/5 of the United States, the ability to grow crops is dependent on irrigation. This is not because the land lacks fertility, but because it lacks moisture. Whenever this has been applied, the land becomes exceedingly more productive." Not only was water essential for farmers in order to grow crops, but ranchers depended on those crops to feed their livestock. Elwood Meade was crucial to the debate and the adoption of water rights. He had experience in managing Wyoming's and Colorado's water laws. He endured many of Colorado's court adjudications and was extremely frustrated. The questions about irrigation and water issues caused several debates. Delegates gathered in Cheyenne in 1888 at the Wyoming Constitutional Convention. Article 8 of the Wyoming Constitution settled arguments that arose over riparian rights and prior appropriation. Meade endorsed the prior appropriation doctrine to be adopted and wanted everyone to receive fair water allocation. Fair allocation of water rather than individual water rights was much more efficient. During a debate, MC Brown stated, "It would be utterly impossible for the legislator or any part of the state to control, regulate, or in any manner interfere with its use. It is only by the declaration that we are to be the absolute owners of all the water that we may be enabled to control unreservedly the uses to which it may be put."
According to Article 8, Section 1 of the Wyoming Constitution, which was adopted in 1890, the water of all natural streams, springs, lakes, or other collections of still water within the boundaries of the state are hereby declared to be the property of the state. Section 2. The state engineer oversees a board to regulate and distribute Wyoming water. Section 3 gives individual rights to water as long as it does not take away from the public. Meade recommended that the Board of Control and the state engineer discuss these essential matters. A superintendent from each of the state's 4 main drainages made up the Board of Control. The board protected the state as well as the private water interests. When Meade was proposing the water law, he focused on 2 main elements. One made sure that there was active state ownership of the water. This ensured that no one could acquire water without a permit from the state. The engineering staff could deny or allow access to any application based on the probability of financial success and according to the public interest. Meade enforced the use it or lose it law that says if you do not use the water you own for several years, then you can lose your right with it. Or if you fail to divert the water, then it can be taken away and given to someone who has a better idea to use the water.
Although Wyoming faced many failures, they also experienced many successes along the way, some of which were the dams built by the Bureau of Reclamation across the North Platte. Due to the lack of water throughout the arid West, people sought out different techniques other than using irrigation systems to grow their crops. One of these methods is dry farming, which is agriculture without irrigation. In order to use this technique, farmers had to use drought-resistant crops and carefully manage the soil in order to save moisture. Dry farming was endorsed by state officials to encourage immigration and stimulate development in agriculture. In the late 1880s, dry farming first became successful. By the early 1900s, dry farming had many supporters, such as Governor B.B. Brooks, Henry B. Henderson, and William C. Deming. In 1908, Governor B.B. Brooks stated, "The importance of the dry farming movement in developing Wyoming and all the other trans-Missouri states cannot be overestimated." Frank Mondell showed his support at the National Dry Farming Congress meeting in 1908. Then, in 1909, he spoke to a dry Congress saying, "I am confident that the passage of the enlarged Homestead Bill will greatly stimulate and encourage dry farming development." The enlarged Homestead Act of 1909 allowed homesteaders to acquire 320 acres of non-irrigatable land instead of the 160 acres provided by the Homestead Act of 1862. Due to the adaptations to farming techniques, dry land was valuable for agricultural use.
By the late 1890s, the people living in the West realized that they would need financial resources to develop their water systems. Wyoming U.S. Senators Francis E. Warren and Joseph Carey, as well as Elwood Mead, created a plan, which became known as the Carey Act, ratified August 18, 1894. It allowed each western state to request up to 1 million acres of public land that they could then sell to fund water projects. Wyoming took the greatest advantage of the Carey Act due to its small population. This act had its own successes and failures. The Cody Canal was one of the first projects under the Carey Act. In 1894, William F. Cody wanted to build an irrigation system along the Shoshone River. By 1905, the Shoshone Irrigation Company spent $282,000 to build a canal that did not work, causing William Cody to become bankrupt.
Throughout the West, annual irrigation congresses tried to organize the efforts to find solutions to the failures of the Carey Act. John Wesley Powell and Elwood Mead realized that the benefits of the Carey Act were inadequate to develop the funding and completion of needed water projects. Consequently, the Reclamation Act was passed in 1902. It allowed small farms to apply for federal money to improve the irrigation of 160 acres of land. This act not only brought settlers to the West, but also helped fund the irrigation projects. Along with the Reclamation Act, the Homestead Acts, and the Desert Land Act brought settlers to the West by promoting and encouraging economic development. With these acts, individuals could acquire farm and ranch land and bring the water that the land desperately needed. Through irrigation brought by the Reclamation Act, cultivating the land was made possible.
Wyoming and Nebraska have been debating over water since the 1880s. Sometimes those debates would end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. In the debate over the North Platte River, Nebraska did not agree that they were getting a reasonable amount of the water. They needed to find a way so that everyone had an equal share of the water from the North Platte.
To find diplomacy among this debate, they went to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1945, they decided that Nebraska would be entitled to 75% of the North Platte's flow, and Wyoming gets the other 25%. The Glendo Dam was proposed, and it was intended to help reduce the loss of capacity in the Guernsey Reservoir. In 1954, construction began, but Nebraska was afraid that the Glendo Reservoir would limit the flow into Lake McConaughey. Public Law 81 was an act of Congress that showed how difficult water would become in the arid West. Congress declared that no money would be appropriated for the Glendo project until Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado could agree on a plan. They were able to achieve diplomacy by working together.
In the late 1970s, many debates arose concerning the construction of the Grey Rocks Dam and Reservoir and the effects it would have on the North Platte River system. According to W.O. Guy from the Missouri Basin Power Project, in November, the state of Nebraska filed suit against the Rural Electrification Administration, contending that the Missouri Basin Power Project environmental impact statement was inadequate and the impoundment of water behind the Grey Rocks Dam would reduce Nebraska's surface and groundwater for irrigation. In 1977, the Nebraska Wildlife Federation and the Audubon joined the lawsuit, claiming the dam would threaten the whooping crane's natural habitat along the North Platte River due to the diminished water supply. Missouri Basin Power Project and Wyoming legislators convinced the federal government and President Carter to amend the Endangered Species Act, which exempted Missouri Basin Power Project from the court order. Consequently, Missouri Basin Power Project paid $7.5 million to fund the Whooping Crane Trust. The agreement allowed Missouri Basin to continue construction. This paved the way for Missouri Basin Power Project to negotiate a compromise with the objecting parties. Levi Mickelsen, manager of the Laramie River Station, explains this compromise.
Construction was halted by a federal judge due to several lawsuits. To avoid costly and lengthy court battles, MBPP took the diplomatic approach. Several negotiation meetings were held. In the end, the 1978 Agreement of Settlement and Compromise was signed by all parties. This was a successful and positive outcome for all parties involved in the debate.
Through failures and consequences, guidelines developed by Elwood Mead allowed for success with water projects in the arid West and continue to influence policies today. Currently, Missouri Basin Power Project has successfully overcome the restrictions on industrial water pumping by coming to a legal agreement with farmers and ranchers to purchase water from their agricultural well. Water users throughout the West are now able to find diplomatic solutions as new debates arise.